And I'd like to welcome you here to the 15th Annual Lynch School Symposium. This evening, I'm delighted to welcome back to the Boston College campus our keynote speaker, Dr. Joan Lombardi. I'd also like to extend a warm welcome and thanks to our respondents, Rebecca Levine-Coley, professor in the Department of Counseling, Developmental, and Educational Psychology, and Mariela Paez, an associate professor in the Department of Teacher Education, Special Education, and Curriculum Instruction. Tonight's symposium will look at the evolution of early childhood education in the United States, exploring progress since the emergence of Head Start, the dramatic shifts in our understanding of the influence of the early years on later outcomes, and where the field is moving. Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Joan Lombardi, who holds a master's in early childhood education from the Lynch School and a PhD in human development education from the University of Maryland. During the last 40 years, Dr. Lombardi has made significant contributions to the field as an innovator leader and a policy advisor to numerous national and international organizations. She currently serves as senior advisor to the Buffett Early Childhood Fund on national initiatives and to the Bernard Van Leer Foundation on global child development strategies. Dr. Lombardi was also recently named a Distinguished Senior Fellow for the Education Commission of the States. Joan has also served under 2 presidential administrations. She was the first Deputy Assistant Secretary for Early Childhood Development for the Obama administration and served as Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy and External Affairs in the Administration for Children and Families during the Clinton administration. Dr. Lombardi was also first Commissioner of the Child Care Bureau. Outside of public service, Joan was the founding chair of the Birth to 5 Policy Alliance, which is now known as the Alliance for Early Child Success, and was founder of Global Leaders for Young Children. Joan's work continues to embody the social justice mission of the Lynch School. She currently serves on the boards of Save the Children, the Collaboration for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, and on Early Opportunities, LLC, which focuses on innovation, policy, and philanthropy. In addition to her extensive work in the field, she's also author of Time to Care, Redesigning Childcare to Promote Education, Support, and Build Communities, and is co-editor of A Beacon of Hope, The Promise of Early Head Start for America's Youngest Children. Please join me in welcoming this distinguished Lynch School alumna, Dr. Joan Lombardi. Thank you, Joan.
I think as you get older, you get more emotional, and it's a very emotional moment for me. First of all, it's in a beautiful crowd, so congratulations on that. But it's been 4 decades since I've been here, so the place doesn't look the same. But I just want to thank the dean and the faculty and all of you for coming out, and particularly to Kyle DeMayo and Caitlin Lombardi, who's not related to me, but has been terrific in helping me make this trip possible. It was here that I learned about Yuri Bronfenbrenner. It was here that I read about Piaget, and that whole world of child development opened up to me and stayed with me and propelled me in all my work. So my roots are deeply here. It was here that we debated curriculum, the same debates we're having now. And so, you just never realize where you'll go and how these formative years will affect your heart and your passions. I want to spend some time, as the dean said, looking back and moving forward. So this little guy kind of is the epitome of that. It's hard for me to believe that it's over 40 years, and so I wanted to bring these pictures. This is my Head Start classroom. in 1972 down the road a piece in Alston. These children now are probably 48, so they don't look like that. In my mind, they're still looking like that, but I keep walking around the streets of Boston thinking that maybe I'll see them. Now with Facebook, I should be able to find them, but I went today to visit some of the classrooms in the Alston Brighton Head Start, and you know, some of the same issues that we struggled with then, you're struggling with now. But it was here that I learned about the realities of children's lives. It was here that I became convinced that waiting till 3 and 4 years old that we see children was way too late, because many of the children were coming in with asthma, coming in with ear infections that were untreated. And so it was here that my passion began around infants and toddlers, which really helped contribute to the team effort to develop Early Head Start. So I owe a lot to Boston College, and I owe a lot to the Alston Brighton Head Start program. But how the world has changed. This is kind of pictures from back then. You like that orange phone? The colors in the 70s were really special. But this was, you know, the days of carbon paper and mimeographs and, you know, Simon and Garfunkel and that whole era that you probably don't know, Ike and Tina Turner. Any of you remember Ike and Tina Turner? Records. And so the world is so completely different than one that we lived in back then. The changing context for children particularly is what I want to focus on. We have so many more children spending time out of home, in out-of-home care, much further away from their extended families. The ever-growing role of media, we could spend the whole afternoon talking about that. The increased exposure to violence that children are seeing today, more packaged food, more fast food, you add to the list. The context of child development, although how children develop, the stages of child development may be the same, the context from which they're growing is so very different. But what I think is now is the vision of what early childhood is. And I think we finally came to a place where we now know that it's not one moment in time. When I was here, Head Start was 6 years old. We had just moved to full-day programs. We thought in the summer of '65 you could solve poverty by providing 8 weeks of a child development program. We soon learned that that, of course, is not possible. What you need is a continuum of service, prenatal through quality K3. And it is that trajectory that I think everybody is coming to accept as what early childhood, how we define early childhood today. Of course, every time I say that, someone in the audience stands up and talks about adolescent health. So I'm acknowledging that before someone asks it. All of those things are related. I do think that we've got a completely different vision now than we had back in '71. Then I think people were still thinking learning begins at school. I think now we know that learning begins at birth. And when you look at the international goals around early childhood, it's very interesting. We have readiness goals here in 1990. What the international goals say is learning begins at birth. So I feel like the rest of the world was ahead of us. Health and education, it's now health and education. Care versus education. We used to have those debates all the time. It doesn't matter what the sign says over the door of a child's program. They're learning when they're there, whether it's childcare or not. Whether we should focus on the child or the parent, I think we know now we have to do 2-generation programs, and that it's not an individual program, it's the continuity prenatal to 8. So that's the vision of early childhood that people are talking about across the country. So what I'd like to talk about is this growing interest that we see in early childhood, look back, talk a little bit about where I think young children are today and the challenges and what's ahead. This is my grandson on his first day of preschool. I bring him with me because I, like so many grandparents, live far away from him, so it's a way for me to keep him with me. We've got this amazing increased recognition of the importance of the early years. I never remember back then that you'd pick up the New York Times and see an editorial about early childhood. It was just not in the lexicon. And now we've got, because of three things, I think, the growing scientific knowledge about the early years, the increased evidence of program effectiveness, so the research that you're doing, and the new champions. We had a wonderful speech last week by the chair of the Federal Reserve, Yellen, here in Boston, gave that speech and talked about the importance of early childhood as an opportunity for young children. That's different. That's not me talking. That's the chair of the Federal Reserve. It makes a difference. We've got this increased interest coming from multiple perspectives, and we all use these graphics to talk about how it's coming from health, how it's coming from education, it's coming from child protection, and it's coming from the efforts to reduce inequity. So the interest is coming from multiple sectors. That helps. We know that the core of the whole thing is not the toys we bring our children after we've gone on a visit. It's the time we give them. And I think that message is finally starting to get across, that it's this increased recognition of the importance of positive child-parent interactions, and that is what brain building is all about. That is what development is all about. It's not the things we give the children, it's the time and attention we give children. And I think that message, that begins to build the architecture of the brain, is getting through. I also think there's been significant interest and recognition that those pathways so important to development start even before a child is born, during that prenatal period, whether it be sensory pathways, language development, higher cognitive function. So this is starting to become more and more common knowledge. What it all boils down to is our job in early childhood is to optimize development by reducing risk factors and increasing protective factors. That is the essence of our work, to increase child development. And I think that notion that you can make this difference is the most hopeful notion that we have. What's interesting is it's finally getting through to public consciousness. This was a poll taken within the last, I think, 6 months, asking voters to place giving children a strong start in life as where it was on the national priorities, and it came out 86% saying that giving children an important, strong start in life is should be one of the country's national priorities. This is different, I think, than where we've been over the years. Something is finally getting through. Also, staying with the good news, we've had a good trend line down with a decrease in births to teens, and we know that placement of birth matters, and how early you have children matters, especially if you're doing it in your teenage years. And so this decrease, this trend down in teen births, is a positive one. I want to give you the positives before the sobering news. We also have globally, we've made good progress in reducing child mortality. We still have about 6 million children around the world dying every year before their 5th birthday. That's unacceptable, particularly since we know what makes a difference to keep children alive. But at least the trajectory of development of child mortality is in the right direction. It's going down. What is the more sobering news is that although about 6 million children are dying before their 5th birthday, about 200 million globally are at risk for healthy development because of poverty and malnutrition. So it's not enough to just keep kids alive. We've got to make sure that they're thriving as well as surviving. So let me turn to the history of federal policy for a second in a nutshell, and I don't want to bore you with the history of federal policy, but really, we made a big, significant step forward in 1935 when the Maternal and Child Health Act passed. At that time, we were still at a point where immunizations, low birth weight, things that were not establishing a strong foundation for children were undermining their development. In the 1940s, as some of you might remember, there was this amazing movement to develop childcare across the country so that women could work in the war effort. Unfortunately, after the war effort, all of those programs closed down, except for in very few locations around the country, because the assumption was women would go home. Now, in fact, many women never went back home, but the country has had a checkered history of recognizing this fact and recognizing that really the United States today is a place where both parents are working to put food on the table. It was not till 65 that we passed Head Start, and again, the driving force of that was reducing inequality and addressing parenting. Interestingly enough, that very year before I got here, we passed the most significant Child Development Act ever, passed both houses of Congress, and we all know how hard that is these days. But it was vetoed because the feeling was that it was anti-family. And it was that point where childcare went over here and education went over here. And we've had trouble bringing those pictures together. It wasn't until 1990 that we passed the first significant childcare legislation. Most of it was focused on childcare as a work support, not recognizing that it also should be a child development program, even though it had the word development in it. It didn't address quality issues. So that was kind of the situation up to the 1990s when this report came out. This was, cute kid, right? This was starting points. It was a report on the needs of children under 3 by the Carnegie Corporation. And it was the beginning effort to talk about brain development. And it was from this report, which came out in 94, right before President Clinton was elected, that began the conversation about maybe 3 is too late. Or not too late, it's never too late, but we need to start earlier. In the late 90s and mid-90s, and as the president came in, 3 significant things happened. One, the very first law he passed and signed, he didn't pass, Congress passed, and he signed, was the Family and Medical Leave Act, so that we finally had 12 weeks of unpaid leave, because before that we didn't even have that. So that was at least a step forward, although minimum. He also passed welfare reform, which was controversial and difficult because people lost their guarantee to assistance. They also lost their child care guarantee. And we established early Head Start. So those were very important years in the country during the Clinton administration to move policy forward. At the same time, it wasn't all happening at the federal level. It was happening in the states. Kindergarten started to grow at the turn of the century. The kindergarten advocates wanted a federal kindergarten bill, never got it passed. It's interesting because now we're working on federal pre-K legislation, and it's still a challenge. Public pre-K started to expand. We started to get public-private partnerships, all with these great names, Smart Start in North Carolina, First Things First in Arizona, First 5 in California, so 0 to 5 partnerships. And then finally, state systems reform happened. So we had both of these things going on at the same time. So, that's kind of the backdrop of where we are today. So what's happening today? Today, as we sit here, about 11,000 children will be born across the country. About 10,000 of us will turn 65 today. So it's about the same. The demographics are entirely different, though. The demographics of the people turning 65, I did that last year, and the people that are being born are completely different. So we've got about 4 million children in the United States born every year, 1 out of 4 of them living in poverty. And, I remember telling my mother that, and my mother saying to me, yeah, I think you're smart, but you must have that wrong. But I don't. Almost 50% of them living in low-income families in one of the wealthiest countries in the world. So we can do a lot better than that. If you look at how much time they're spending in childcare, again, the context of the 20 million children under 5, about 61%, about 12 million of them, are spending time in childcare on a regular basis, although the country has not come to grips with that fact. I think they're still in denial about it. If you look at, this is a little hard to read, I hope you can see it in the back, But this is the percentage of people in poverty by age group from 1966, so before I got here, to 2012. The green line is people 65 and over. So you can see that trend line, we did well from 66 on in providing a sense of support, economic support underneath the elderly population. That was really important to reduce poverty among the elderly. The blue line is 18 to 64-year-olds, but the red line is children, 0 to 17, and it would be more dramatic if I showed you 0 to 5. So the problem is that for our youngest children, for our children in general, we don't have the economic supports in place to make sure that they their families move out of poverty. If we look at relative poverty in 32 countries, look at us. We rank second to the last. And this is, Germany, Ireland, Switzerland, many of the OECD countries, we rank second to the last in relative poverty. If you look at infants and toddlers in deep poverty, you've got about 12% of children in deep poverty. That's 50% of the poverty line. So imagine living in Boston at 50% of the poverty line. It's hard enough if you're at median income, I'm sure. So the younger you are in the United States, the poorer you are. So infants and toddlers are poorer than children older than them, the wrong direction for vulnerability. So we've got a huge opportunity gap in the country that leads to an achievement gap that leads to a productivity gap. I mean, this is the situation that, and not to put this in productivity terms, I'm sure some people don't like that, but this is kind of the business perspective on what the challenges that we're facing today. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're getting interest in the topic. So what happens because of that? This is the birth cohort study in the United States, the early childhood longitudinal study. This is looking at cognitive development of infants and toddlers at 9 months and 24 months by poverty level. And so you can see that gap in cognitive development starting as early as 9 months and growing at 24 months. And if you look at the trend line, it just continues to grow over time. If we look at disparities, and I don't know why this slide does this. If we look at disparities in early development, this is the well-known Hart and Risley study that looked at vocabulary development in college-educated and less than college-educated families, and we know that there's this tremendous gap in vocabulary, and we all know that vocabulary leads to reading. I mean, there's a direct correlation between that. So why we would be waiting and getting concerned about reading in 3rd grade rather than below 3 is beyond understanding. So we have this word gap. Many of you might have heard there was a big conference about the word gap last week, and knowing that economically advantaged kids know about twice as many words, hear twice as many words as more economically disadvantaged children. But the issue is not the quantity of the words. It's the quality of the interactions. It's not just the words. I think we're putting a lot of emphasis on the number of words, but it's really what we're learning now, what some of the research that was presented last week is telling us, is it's the conversational aspect of the language development that really makes a difference. So I always want to, before I talk about the challenges, I always want to put this slide up. This is data from Head Start. As children came into the program a few years ago. And the reason I put it up, it's their scores on their PPVTs, their language tests, letter word, and applied problems as they came into Head Start. And the reason I put this up is they're all poor, but they come in at various levels of development. So just because they're poor doesn't mean that they're not doing really well in some circumstances. So, I worry in all of our effort to talk about the word gap and the impact on poverty that we're seeing children as a class rather than looking at them individually and realizing that they're coming in with potential. They're coming in with potential. It may vary, but they're coming in with potential, and we've got to build on that. So just looking at a little bit more at the data, this is a report that the McCormick Foundation put out, looking at disparities by race and ethnicity in prenatal care, with late or no prenatal care much higher in American Indian and Alaska Native families and African American families. So the disparities and the racial disparities start early. If we look at maternity leave, so remember I said that Clinton signed, the first bill he signed was the paid leave, that was a nice slip, I wish. The parental leave bill, one of the first ones we ever had. We are still the only country that does not require paid leave among the OECD countries. The only country. And when you travel a lot, I travel a lot, people ask you why. And it's so hard to explain the cultural dynamic that goes into the resistance to giving paid leave to families when we know it would be so much better if a mother or a father could stay home, I think, for at least the first year of life. But we don't have anywhere near that if we look at ourselves in relation to 38 developed countries. If you look at what that means to child well-being, so those were the policies that are not in place. This was a study that was put out a few years ago on child well-being in rich countries, a comparative overview, and it's hard to read, but I can tell you we're 26th out of 29th. So this isn't poverty, this is how are the children actually doing on a whole range of things like maternal well-being, health and safety, education, behavioral risks, housing and environment. So this is a little bit alarming to see how much we need to do to improve the well-being of children. We need to talk about this. So let's talk a little bit about challenges moving ahead. This was my grandson sent me, did this picture. He didn't do the picture, he did this lineup. He lives in New York and he's in traffic a lot. So I figure that he told me this was a traffic jam. And sometimes I feel like our policies are in a traffic jam, so I brought that with me. So where do I think I have, 6 or 7 things I think need to happen. First of all, I think we've got to start tracking, establishing child development goals and tracking outcomes at the population level. Now we all talk about we need preschool, we need this program, we need home visiting, but really what we need is a way to look at how our children are doing. Are pregnancies healthy, and are they born healthy? Are children thriving at 3? Are they eager, engaged, and ready at 5? Are they successful in school, and not just on math and literacy, but are they well-rounded at 3rd grade? So this notion of tracking child development at the population level in a community, I think, is where we need to go. The challenge is we don't have good measures. We're starting to get school readiness measures. They're being used well in some places, not well in others. But I think there is a sense of trying to track healthy development. We're very early on looking at how our 3-year-olds doing, and we need that data to really convince people that you shouldn't be waiting till kids get to school to make a difference. So tracking development at the population level. Funding to meet the needs of children and families. I always try to not put this first, although it's the thing I want to talk about the most. We've got 1 out of 6 eligible families able to access child care assistance. That means if you're in a state and the federal level says you can go up to 85% of median income to get child care assistance, if you're in line, only 1 out of 6 of you are going to get it. That's pretty outrageous. If you look at public preschool, pre-K, and Head Start together, reaches about 40% of the 4-year-olds and 14% of the 3-year-olds. That's 42 years after I did my own work. I never thought we would be that far behind. If you look at Early Head Start, the program that is really my heart, it serves less than 5% of the eligible population, and the eligible population is children in poverty. So we've got a long way to go. If you look at, this is a friend of mine, Charlie Bruner, who did this slide that looked at public investment, ages 6 to 18 is the tall column, preschool, and in infants and toddlers. You see the disparity in investments. So we're spending more on the older end of education than on the lower end of education. I want those bars to be equal and not one going down and the other one going up, but more equal than they are now. So what has happened since the Obama administration? What was exciting for me, and I hope for the rest of the country, was that when the president came in, it was a very difficult time, the time of the recession, but we put $5 billion into early childhood as part of the recovery. And to me, the big message there was, if you want the economy and the country to do well, then you've got to invest in early childhood. And that was an important message. We tried to do a quality improvement plan for Head Start. We launched a new maternal, infant, and early childhood home visiting program, which is evidence-based, which is exciting. And we launched the Early Learning Challenge Fund that went to 20 states, a program that I think should have been in all 50, but at least we got to 20. And we moved to place-based strategies with Promised Neighborhoods, which was modeled after the Harlem Children's Zone. And I think there's exciting work going on, place-based strategies going on here in Boston that we can all learn from. The president had a much more extensive plan, proposing a cigarette tax that would have funded preschool for all children, 4-year-old children, at least 200% of poverty, made improvements in childcare, expanded early Head Start. It did not move forward, although we got some movement forward, but not the significant investments that we all hope for. We have new enthusiasm, new grants that are pending right now around early Head Start childcare partnerships, new preschool grants, and pending legislation on childcare, and a new bill called Strong Start for America's Children. So the bottom line here is things are not stuck. They are moving. There's more interest than ever before, but we still have a long way to go. The area that I'm the most concerned about when we talk about quality is the workforce. We've got, these are wonderful jobs, potentially. And we've got many different roles. We've got rising expectations. What those teachers in that program are expected to do is so much more than what I was expected to do 40 years ago. We've got competencies, including an ability to appreciate cultural diversity and dual language learning, that should grow. We need more coordinated credentialing systems. We know mentoring makes a difference. We know the capacity of the higher education system is strained, particularly if somebody wants to work with infants and toddlers. You can hardly find a course that would prepare you for the jobs. And we have got a real problem on the recognition. But we've got a lot of new job categories. And they're not the jobs that you can ship overseas. That's what I keep trying to tell people. These are the jobs, caring jobs, whether it be healthcare, senior care, or child care, that the country should be investing in. But here's the problem. If you look just at center-based providers, about 1 million of them across the country, about a third of them work with 0 to 3. About 50%, a little bit more, work with 3 to 5-year-olds only, and about 9% serve both. If you look at their education attainment of 0 to 3, the people that work with 0 to 3, about 19% have a BA, compared to about 45% of preschool teachers. So we've got a much more educated workforce working with the older continuum of the early childhood workforce. But this is the crux of the whole issue. If you look at the median hourly wages of a center-based teacher and caregivers, and this is center-based, it's not even family child care, which is a whole nother situation. You've got people who are caring for children 0 to 3 making about $9 an hour, people working with children 3 to 5, 11, and people that work with both groups about 10. Even when you have a BA, you make about $11 an hour if you care for 0 to 3, and $15 an hour if you care for 3 to 5-year-olds. Now, this is national data. It's probably higher in Massachusetts, I can only imagine, and there's been great advocacy done here over the years. But unless we fix that situation, we're never going to get to the quality that the children deserve. So the living conditions of staff are their working conditions, and they affect the quality of what we provide for children. And it's okay to talk about wages and still be on the side of child development. They go together. And I think that's been a hard thing for early childhood people to say. I've spent a lot of time today talking about, with the faculty, you're doing great work across the city around supporting families. I think family engagement is the most misunderstood component of our work. I think we're struggling with how to define it and what we want out of it. It's the goal, I say this to Head Start people all the time, the goal is not parent involvement in the program. That's not the goal. The goal is parents' involvement with their children. And we've got to keep that in front of us. And I think the more we say it, the clearer we say it, the more people will understand what they're supposed to do. It's not about how many bake sales they participate in, unless that helps them feel better about their children. That's what the whole goal is. And more, I think we need social networks of support for families. I mean, we're all split up, we're all extended all over the country. When I think of who supports my own children, I know it's not me, I will live 200 miles away. It's their friends, it's their colleagues, it's the people they meet at church, it's other people other than their traditional extended family. We have to recreate social networks. That's what gets us through in times of crisis, right? We all know that. And I think we have not been doing enough talk about fathers and grandfathers, and I'm very excited about some of the work that's going on across the country and around the world to get men more engaged in the lives of their children. We are not training teachers on why family engagement is important. We're not training enough teachers on how to get families more involved in the education and care of their children. One of the most significant things I think that we need to recognize is the education of the parent is directly related to their readiness, the readiness scores of their children. So this is the same data set, a similar data set. This is the early longitudinal study looking at reading and math scores in kindergarten, first time kindergarten, by the education level of their parent, so that you can see the blue is less than high school, the darker blue is graduate level. So you know that the education, and this is the mother, although I think it's the mother and the father, there's a direct relationships between the education of mothers and the ability of their children as they start school. So why would we do policies that say you have to go to work first, you can't go to school? It's not a readiness policy if we do that. It's not a child development policy, and we should be concerned about that. So we've got to be concerned about secondary education of families if we're concerned about early education of their children. So that's a two-generation focus. That's what we're talking about a lot now, a two-generation focus. So it's early childhood along with social networks of support and post-secondary education for their families and economic supports. That's the new think about family engagement. I've only got a few more left. We need to coordinate across our early childhood system. We have standards for Head Start, standards for childcare, standards for pre-K. We've got to align things. And that doesn't mean reducing everything to the lowest common denominator. That means lifting all programs up to the highest common denominator. We've got to look across professional development, family engagement, data collection, and have a more coordinated system. And I think that's what the Early Learning Challenge Fund was really trying to do. And creating community hubs. We were talking with some of the faculty before about trying to encourage family engagement in programs where you've got no family coordinator, you've got no support system to do work with families. We've got to create community hubs of support for the child care community to support their work on quality and to support their work with families. So assuring continuity is my sixth point, almost final point. From the prenatal period on, it's not enough to do it in one place. Parents are the continuity. That's why it's so important to work with them. We're going to see their children for 1 or 2 years, and they're going to be passed on to somebody else. It's up to us to make them advocates for their children. They provide the continuity that we can never provide. And then my final point is to encourage new leaders in the field. I feel this is a picture of global leaders. These are leaders in a leadership program that I did in partnership with many other people. They're leaders from all over the world. Many of us are aging out here. We've been long-standing advocates, but it's time for a new generation of leader, a leader that reflects the languages and the cultures of the children that we see and the richness of the country. And I feel it is a very rich country that is as diverse as we are, but we have to be systematic in developing leadership programs, and I think that'll make a difference. But remember the goal. The goal for me, when I went back to government, I decided to put a goal on the table, and I was worried about saying, one of my goals is happy children, and then someone told me that, that we talk about health and happiness and the pursuit of happiness, so it was okay if I had a goal that children would be happy and successful. And we all have these learning standards, and we have books and books of early learning standards that everybody's trying to focus on. To me, it reduces to this. I want them to be joyful. I want them to be curious. I want them to be persistent. That's what executive function is. I want them to be full of language, because language is so important to academic success. And I want order in their lives, because I think kids are leading very chaotic lives, and we have to make them more orderly, more the kind of routines that were so apparent to Maria Montessori when she was working with poor children, that you have to put order in children's lives, because order builds their sense of safety and their sense of trust in the environment. So that's my goal for children. My goal for you is to take care of your health, to take care of your family, to take care of your friends, to take care of your community, to say no if it's one more meeting that's going to mean that your own family is sacrificed, and to take care of your spirit, and to God bless you. Thank you.
That's a tough act to follow. I would like to thank you very much, Joan, for joining us. That was really an incredibly broad and rich view of early childhood policy and practice. What I would like to do in my comments is sort of narrow in on some of the main themes that Joan spoke about this evening, focused on early childhood education and practice and policy. So she talked a little bit about gaps in children's achievement levels and readiness for school, ability to enter school successful, ready to learn, ready to behave, ready to make friends. One thing that we've learned recently from research that's very concerning is that these gaps have grown. So there are substantial gaps between poor children and economically advantaged children in the United States that, as Joan mentioned, start early in childhood, in infancy even. And by the time children are ready to enter kindergarten, these gaps are equal to almost one standard deviation. So if you think about, everyone knows about IQ scores or achievement scores, where the average score, the mean score is 100. That means poor children come in with scores of 85, 86, 87 in comparison to a score of 100 for advantaged children. And these gaps have grown dramatically. So in just the past generation, gaps between poor and advantaged children have grown 30 to 40%. Another thing we know from recent research is that one of the main drivers of these gaps is disparities in the inputs and the resources that children have available to them. So Joan talked about the importance of language input. We also know about the importance of lots of other inputs, of learning opportunities, of consistency in their environments, of the relationships that they develop. So in the early childhood field, we have strong evidence from many decades ago about the effectiveness of intensive, high-quality early childhood education programs for poor children. So many people in the field talk about the Perry preschool program, the Abecedarian program. These are programs that provided high-quality early childhood education to poor children and saw incredible effects. So children not only entered school with much greater skills, much greater behavioral skills and cognitive skills, but those greater skills continued and increased into adulthood. So children in those programs were more likely than their peers to graduate from high school. They were less likely to have a baby as an adolescent. They were less likely to go to jail. They were more likely to have a good, stable job and higher wages in adulthood. So we know that high-quality early education programs are effective. The challenges that we face are, how do we take those to scale? How do we make those sorts of programs available for all children? And how do we delineate what types of programs, what practices in those programs are most effective at helping the children of today? So one thing to think about is, what are the barriers to access? Why aren't all children in these high-quality programs? One thing simply is cost, right? So if we look at our own lovely state of Massachusetts, in 2012, which is the most recent data we have available for the state, the cost of sending one infant to childcare was over $16,000 a year. For a preschooler, it was over $12,000 a year. So the average family has 2 children. It's almost $30,000 a year simply to pay for someone to care for your children. If we think about comparing that to other basic needs or basic costs that families face, the average cost of a public education, a public college or university — this is not Boston College — an average public college or university is $11,000 in Massachusetts. So preschool costs more than university. It also costs about the same as the average amount of rent paid by a family in Massachusetts. If you own your own home, it's much larger, about $25,000 a year, but that's still less than the cost of having 2 children, right? So if we think about low-income families, it's perfectly reasonable. There's no way that they can afford this on their own. People are very concerned right now about saving for college education. I just read a report a couple days ago suggesting that if we wanted to save to be able to pay for our children to go to childcare and preschool, we would have to start saving when we were 8 years old. It's a little concerning. Okay, so how do we address these access issues, these cost issues? There are many policy mechanisms that try to address these and try to increase low-income families' access to quality preschool and early childhood education programs. So John talked a lot about Head Start. Head Start is one of the primary mechanisms through which the federal government provides access to early childhood education programs. The federal government also provides quite a lot of money through block grants to the states, that the states in turn give out to low-income families to access programs. One problem is that the funding for these programs peaked in 2001 and have declined since then. States and local communities have sort of stepped into the void a little bit and have dramatically increased funding in the past decade. But indeed, in the past 2 years after the recession, we've seen decline in state funding as well. And these funding sources are essential. So my research with colleagues looking at children all across the country, have shown that state subsidies, so how generous state subsidies are in providing subsidies for low-income families, how many preschool slots the state directly funds through universal pre-K programs, as well as just the availability of preschool and early education programs in one's community, are all very significant factors in whether or not children attend center-based early childhood programs. So we know that these funding mechanisms are essential. Another thing that's really challenging is to think about, how do we best use our public funds, right? So one way is to increase access. We have more money that we want to use, put towards this issue. We want to increase the number of children who can attend early childhood education. But another possible use for that money is to increase the quality of those programs. So let's look at our own state of Massachusetts and think about, how have we in this state spent our money on early childhood education. Massachusetts is known as a leader in many areas of education, and we've done some unique things in early education. So in 2005, almost a decade ago, we were the first state in the country to create a consolidated state-level department and have one person in charge of early education and care throughout the whole state. In 2006, we created a universal pre-kindergarten grant program to give monies to local communities to help improve their pre-kindergarten programs, preschool programs. We also put a lot of funding towards early childhood education scholarships. So by this I mean for adults, for students to go to school to take college level classes and get degrees in early childhood education. In 2008, the legislature passed a universal pre-K system, although it's important to note they didn't fund it. In 2008, we also started a quality ratings improvement system, QRIS. This is a system that's now being put into place in almost every state across the country that seeks to increase the quality of early education programs. And just recently in 2011, we won a large grant from the federal government, an Early Learning Challenge grant, that again is really being dedicated towards increasing the quality of early childhood education programs. So all of this is to say, in Massachusetts, I think we've really gone more towards trying to improve quality than improve access. It shouldn't be an either or, as Joan said. We're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We should be able to do both. So in thinking about where the money is going, one of the questions that I and my colleagues have been asking is, what are the program types, what are the program models in early education that are really most effective in supporting healthy child development? So first, let's just look at where children are. So this is a national sample of low-income preschool-age children, 4-year-old children, and we see here that only about 50% of them are in center-based early childhood education programs. So 22% in Head Start, 11% in publicly funded preschool programs, and 18% in private preschool programs. So again, only about half of low-income children are attending these programs in the year before they start kindergarten. Why is this important? This is centrally important because we know that these programs are effective in raising children's skills to prepare for school, in their cognitive skills, in their ability to pay attention. So these data are from a paper that I recently conducted with Kyle and other colleagues looking at this is a graph looking at children's reading skills after attending Head Start, publicly funded or privately funded preschool programs. And the higher level bars show the increases in reading skills in comparison to children who didn't attend preschool programs. So before I talked about the achievement gaps between poor and well-off children, attending preschool in this data set deleted about half of the achievement gaps between poor children and well-off children. It didn't erase them, but that's pretty good success, right? So let's think now, children are attending all different sorts of programs, and that's one of how the federal and state funding systems are put in place, that they provide for a lot of choice. There are Head Start programs, there are public programs, there are private programs, in a lot of different locations and different auspices. But are certain programs more or less effective in helping children develop for school? What are the characteristics of programs that are most effective? If we look at the publicly funded programs, we see some really great characteristics. So Head Start programs are the programs that are most effective at keeping teachers in continuing ongoing professional education and training. We look at structured observational measures of program quality that address the materials that are available, the social setting, the consistency and regularity of the routines, the interactions between teachers and children. And we see that Head Start programs on average get very high ratings in program quality. When we look at public preschool programs, we again see some real strengths. So teachers in these programs are more likely than other sorts of early childhood education programs to have a college education. They're more likely to have a college degree in early childhood education or developmental psychology, a related field. We also have found that publicly supported programs more frequently engage in key literacy activities, language activities, and math activities that are linked to children's learning. However, there are some sort of bad news from this research. There's increasing, a sort of growing body of research from around the country suggesting that many of these features that we have seen for decades as being essential metrics of quality in early childhood education, so teachers having a college degree, smaller child adult ratios, activities, greater program quality with these global measures, that many of these measures actually are not doing a very good job in predicting children's outcomes, in predicting how much children are learning and how well prepared they are for school, how skilled they are in interacting with their peers, how much they can self-regulate their behaviors. So I think there's a lot of younger people in the room now thinking about their careers in the future. This is an urgent need in the field. Really gaining a deeper understanding of how do we measure, how do we assess what is high quality early childhood education? What are the key components? How can we help to spread these through the quality rating systems that states are taking up? There's a lot of work now in specific curricula in early childhood education, so curricula programs that focus specifically on literacy skills, on math skills, on social skills, on self-regulation that are gaining progress. There are some systems that are really focusing more on trying to understand the interactions between teachers and children and arguing that it's not really about just the structure of the program. What's centrally important, as Joan mentioned, is the relationships, is the interactions between staff and children and between children and children. So really thinking much more deeply about how we capture that, how we measure that, and then how we train early childhood educators to continue those practices and improve on those practices. So I'd like to end with this slide. So Joan also had a slide with lots of little circles. This is my slide with lots of little circles that talks about how I view and how I think this story has been told about the integration between research and practice and policy. So early childhood education certainly didn't start in the 60s and 70s with Head Start and Preschool, but I think we draw on that era for a lot of our work. So if you look at the top circle, we have a research circle ball with experimental evidence, this new evidence that was incredibly exciting about the efficacy of early childhood education for improving the lives of poor children. That led to a lot of shifts in policy, expansions in Head Start, expansions in public funding, which led to changes in practice in how we treat and teach young children, in parents' decisions about work, huge increases in the use of early childhood education. That in turn led to more research of trying to delineate the most promising models and the most promising aspects of early childhood education, which led to a huge burgeoning of new policy efforts, the quality rating improvement systems that have been put in place in states around the country trying to improve the policy. But now we're back at research. We're finding that many of those quality rating improvement systems are using measures and metrics that are not as effective as they should be. So the circle sort of starts over again. So it gives us all lots of things to work for, lots of things to hope for. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Dean Kenny, for the invitation to participate as part of this symposium. And thank you to Dr. Lombardi for a wonderful presentation. Really exciting to take a look back and see where we are now. And for Professor Colley's look at the national and local context. I think the information you presented on Massachusetts is important. Thank you. Indeed, I agree that we have come a long way in early childhood education in this nation, and there's still work to be done, right? I think we learned from both presentations that we just heard that there's still a lot of work that we need to do in order for every child to have access to high-quality programs and to have a bright start to their education. Like Dr. Lombardi, I started as a teacher, a preschool teacher in early childhood classrooms and a developmental educator in early intervention programs here in Massachusetts. And you know, one of the concerns I had when I was teaching and when I was working with families in early intervention was how we were providing services for culturally and linguistically diverse families. it's really what propelled me to attain a doctoral degree and enter an academic career. I knew that we needed to improve our services for this diverse families. And as I look back to these experiences and where I started, about 20 years ago, I know that we're doing better in addressing the needs of diverse learners, but we can do more. And so in my remarks today, I'm going to focus on this context changing. That's how Dr. Lombardi referred to it, that there's a changing context for the early childhood population. And I'd like to focus on that increasing diversity of the early childhood population and to discuss some of the implications for considering the needs of this diversity in early childhood programs. In particular, I want to talk to you about dual language learners. These are children who speak a language other than English at home and are learning 2 languages. Across the nation, we're seeing educational systems are experiencing an increase in the number of young children who enter our educational system and speak a language other than English. And look at the recent statistics. This is also, I think, reflective of a demographic shift in the United States. Nearly 1 in 4 children in the US is Latino Hispanic, and more than 1 in 5 comes from a home where a language other than English is spoken. I think if you look at the data from Massachusetts, you also find this trend. Right now, if you look at the population, 3 to 5 year old population in the state, about 17% of that population are children who speak a language other than English at home. And so this is something that we've seen across the nation, and I think that the demographic transformation is very significant in early childhood programs. And when you look at the number of children that are entering early childhood settings who are dual language learners. With regards to their participation, we can take a look at the data from Head Start programs. In 2007, DLLs were reported to be 30% of the Head Start enrollment nationally. This, like Dr. Lombardi mentioned, is a very important program in our nation and one that has been serving increasingly DLL students. 85% of the DLLs were from Latino Spanish-speaking families. And again, this is a trend reflected in the nation in terms of immigration and immigrant families in the nation. Most of them are from Spanish-speaking groups. And so we have Head Start, who really has served the Latino population, increasingly so. But when you look at Latino children in general, what you find is that they're less likely to participate in preschool programs than any other group in our nation. And I can share with you some percentages that reflect this. For example, if you look at 4-year-olds, right now, non-Hispanic 4-year-olds, non-Latino 4-year-olds participate at a rate of 70%, and Latino 4-year-olds, 64%. And the gap is wider when you look at 3-year-olds. For 3-year-olds, about 25% of Latino 3-year-olds participate in some time of center-based program, public or private, compared to 43% of non-Hispanic children. So we have low levels of participation, uneven participation for this group of students. And even though we have those low levels of participation, we have research indicating that participating in these programs can have clear benefits for these students. So there's research showing that students participating in early childhood programs can learn language, early literacy, math, science, self-regulation skills, which are very important for school readiness. In addition, the findings about early childhood programs and benefits to children is especially true when you look at children that are experiencing multiple risk. So children that are living in poverty or deep poverty, like Rebecca just mentioned, children who are living with a teen mother or with parents who lack a high school degree. All of these types of risk and the students that experience this can benefit from early childhood. And so I think that thinking about dual language learners is important, and Latino children in particular, because we want to increase their access to early childhood programs, and we want to increase their participation. But I also think it's important to consider the case of dual language learners because they're presenting a unique, distinct developmental profile. Let me tell you what I mean by this. In the past 10 years, we've seen an increase in research with young DLL students and children. And now we have this understanding that we need to consider development for these children within their social, cultural, and historical contexts. We have evidence showing that DLL children demonstrate particular developmental pathways in cognitive, language, and social-emotional skills that are different from monolingual students. And these differences need to be considered in early childhood research, policy, and education. Recently, I co-authored a report, a social policy report for the Society of Research in Child Development with a group of esteemed colleagues, and we were highlighting some of these findings about the differences when considering development for multilingual children, bilingual children. And I want to highlight a few of these important findings about the unique profiles of these students. So regarding language and literacy, right, that's the most evident difference for the students. Regarding language and literacy skills, research has found that DLL children are developing receptive and expressive skills, so language skills in 2 languages, and that their level of proficiency and their knowledge in these languages might vary according to the quality and the quantity of exposure. So quantity and quality of input is important, and it varies across contexts when you consider the home, the school, the community. Another important finding from the research is that we want parents to expose children to the best, richest linguistic environment possible. And this is why we want to support parents using the language that they feel most comfortable in, that the language that they are proficient. Along with this finding, there's considerable evidence supporting maintaining the first language and the contributions of first language to learning a second language. We now have evidence that supports how children can effectively acquire a second language, and they can do this more quickly if they have a good foundation in the first language. And finally, the report also summarized some of the linguistic, cognitive, and cultural benefits of bilingualism and multilingualism. And so if we consider and take into account this unique profile and the characteristics of DLL students, how can we best serve these students? And how do we define high quality for this population? Both presentations talked about the importance of quality, and I think that what we need for quality is basically a new definition. Professor Coley referred to this in thinking about new measures and new ways of thinking about how we go into the programs and measure what is high quality. And I think, indeed, we are right now developing new measures. And what I argue is that these new measures of quality and the new definitions of quality need to be inclusive of the specific cultural, linguistic, and educational needs of dual language learners. For example, if we are going into programs and we're looking at the quality of instructional environments, we should consider how programs are focusing on oral language development. How are they teaching vocabulary in particular, given that we have established that this is an area of need and challenge for DLL students, and it's an important area in early childhood development. In the same way, we should be looking at how programs are supporting first language skills in addition to English, and how are they supporting these home languages for children participating in the classroom. And one final point that I think is important for quality is looking at programs and how they're connecting with families. Dr. Lombardi talked about that importance of family engagement and that connections that you want to create with the families. And I love how you put it, that it's about parents connecting with their children, not necessarily participating in the program, but increasing their participation and interactions with their children. I think that's a great way to think about parent participation. And I wanted to share with you an example from my work that addresses these issues of quality and these concerns for DLL students. During the past 5 years or so, I've been involved in the kindergarten language study. This is a project that I started here at Boston College, and with the help of undergraduates, graduate, and doctoral students, I conducted this study, and it's a NACHD-funded study. It was 5 years. And we developed, the goal of the program was to design, develop, implement an intervention program that would address the need of Spanish-English bilingual kindergarten students. We wanted to increase their oral language skills, and the program consisted of 2 components: a classroom component that we developed where we worked with teachers and we enhanced what they were doing in the classrooms by teaching more explicitly vocabulary and addressing oral language skills through read-alouds in their classrooms and in their teaching. And then the second component was a family literacy component. And what we did is we matched the books that we were using with teachers and the materials, we matched those in Spanish to work with families who were interested in increasing their participation at home with their children. And findings, by the way, we met, this is a picture from one of the sessions. We met monthly with the parents. We met monthly with the teachers, and we also met monthly with the parents. And we would share the books and share with them ideas for culturally relevant activities that they could do, using the books really as a foundation for those activities. And what we found was that the children that participated in both components, so they had the home plus classroom intervention, made the largest gains in their oral language skills. And more importantly, we also found that parents are eager to support their use of Spanish and to support their children at home, but oftentimes they lack the resources and the knowledge of how to do this in ways that connect significantly and I think in ways that connect conceptually too with the school. And so, for intervention results, we found that parents that participated in the intervention increased the frequency of reading at home, and the books were read multiple times. And I think what we were doing with parents is asserting their role and the use of Spanish at home as a potential vehicle to support their children's learning. This is just an example of the type of programs and the potential for developing this relationship with parents that we know can benefit young children. In closing, I want to make some comments about future directions for early childhood and DLLs. And I think it's important as we develop and expand programs, we include pre-K as part of the K-12 system, that we think about DLLs as a special population. And when we develop policies like the state early learning standards, quality rating systems, we need to include explicit provisions to address the needs of DLLs. I mentioned here Head Start. I think this is a great example of a policy that is really incorporating and thinking about DLL children and what sort of strategies and modifications you need to have in order to address the needs of these students. Second, I think we need to continue to develop teachers and programs that are highly qualified to serve this population. Both speakers have addressed this. This is about the workforce, the teachers. I'm happy to report that here at Boston College, we have been at the forefront of teacher training and developing teachers who understand DLLs. We have a teaching English language certificate that we started 10 years ago under the leadership of Maria Brisk, and we have been training teachers to understand DLL students. So, how do you learn 2 languages? How do you support language and literacy skills in children that are developing in 2 languages? The important role of culture. What are some instructional practices and appropriate assessments that you can implement with this group of students? This is what we teach our teachers here at Boston College, and I'm also happy to report that under the leadership of Professor Patrick Proctor, we started a new certificate program for teaching dual language learners, and this is something that just started, and we're going to be training teachers to work in bilingual programs. And this relates to my second point here about developing programs. This is an area that I think that still needs a lot more research. We need more research with regards to the type of programs and the language of instruction that can support DLL children. But recent evidence suggests that including children's first language skills and these dual language programs where instruction happens in both languages can be very effective. So this perhaps is a successful programmatic strategy for the future, and we are training teachers to work on those programs. Finally, I think as we move with areas of research that we know are underway in early childhood, we need to consider the approaches for DLL. So curricula, Professor Colley mentioned that there's right now in the United States, we have a couple of research programs that are looking at early childhood curricula. And I think we need to consider how that curricula works for DLL students. We need to include them in the studies and investigations that are looking at this curricula. Dosage, that's another area that I think we're doing right now, studies in this area of dosage. Do you want 1 year, 2 years? And like Professor Colley said, it's about resources. So if you have limited resources, how do you distribute those resources and make decisions about the best use of resources? Birth to 5, do we focus on the 3-year-olds, on the 4-year-olds? Access versus quality, these are important questions that I think we still are trying to figure it out. 2 more ideas for future research. I think we need more studies on the best strategies for engaging families, especially culturally and linguistically diverse families, and best strategies to transition children and families from early childhood settings to the K-12 system. I think transitioning is an important aspect, and it goes back to alignment. So I hope that in the future we consider DLLs when we're researching all these important questions. And thank you. I think that getting it right for these students is important, and it's not just about the future of our children, but it's about the future of our nation. Thank you.
Thank you for this impressive series of presentations and packed with a lot of information, really highlighting the expertise that currently exists in the Lynch School and what our alumni bring to the conversation and the table with many years of experience. We do have some time for some questions, so I'd like to invite the panelists to come up to the table, and we will entertain some questions.
People have to leave.
We will have a reception afterwards also, so that people can stay.
I know.
Be happy to stay for the reception.
They're missing the wine.
So we need a mic.
Hello. Is it on? Okay, thank you so much to all of the presenters. As an early childhood professional, we talk a lot in the profession about playful learning as being an element of quality. And so you've spoken today, you spoke about outcomes such as developing executive functioning, literacy, joy. I love that Dr. Lombardi used that. Developing as a bilingual. And we know that all of this can happen through play, but I don't hear the words playful learning coming to the top of the policy conversation. And I wondered if you had any suggestions of how can we propel that term forward and that idea?
Well, I think we should start using it more. That's a start. You're absolutely right to call us out on that. And I mean, I think the way you put it, playful learning, is the way to put it. You know, so we've had, from the time I was here, we had these debates about play versus, academics. And I think we've transcended that now, and that using terms like playful learning will be helpful, but we shouldn't shy away from the word play. Early childhood is playful learning.
I would just concur with that. I think that there is a lot of attention now being paid to curricula in early childhood, and I think we need to be careful with the language we use. Because when people think curriculum, they often think worksheets and, very structured. So I think it is important, the language we use when we're talking about early childhood, and to make sure that it's developmentally appropriate language.
And I would say that one of the concerns I have with the current expansion of public preschool is that we lose the importance of playful learning. Teaching young children is not like teaching first grade or second grade. It's very different, and you need that playful learning, and you need the curricula that is developmentally appropriate. And so I agree. I think playful learning is at the core of teaching strategies with young children, and I hope that we continue to emphasize that, even with the expansion to the K-12 system.
What does it mean that we've gotten to the point where we can't say that word? I mean, it's really very interesting that you had to bring it up, right? It's amazing.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. My name is Lauren Nelson. I'm from Cambridge College. I'm asking this question as a non-education major, so bear with me. But one of the statistics that you spoke about in particular was 1 out of 4 kids live in poverty, children, and the effects of that. I'm kind of curious, as children grow, sometimes their socioeconomic status changes. How does that affect their developmental process? And is that something that factors into your research?
Well, I think there is a cumulative effect of poverty. So the longer we know that from the research, the longer you're in poverty, the more significant the impacts are. So, I think you worry less when people come in and out, but what we see for a large group of children is prolonged poverty. So over multiple years, and that is where we have a bigger concern. So it does make a difference.
I would add to that also a couple of things. One is that research, there's some really nice studies that have looked at the developmental timing of poverty. So does it matter if you're poor during early childhood versus during middle childhood versus during adolescence? And what those studies show is that it does matter, and that early childhood poverty is the most detrimental. Research has also shown that changes in poverty status or changes in family income lead to changes in children's outcome. Eric Deering has some great work on this. So if families' economic situations improve, their children's functioning tend to improve. And the same vice versa. If middle-class families lose ground economically and become poor, then their children's functioning tends to decline. So it's not a sort of static situation.
I think that's why it's so important that we have high expectations. I always worry that, people assume poverty means that we should have low expectations when it should be exactly the opposite.
I would add that for the DLL population and research, there's really a confounding factor of poverty there. When you think about Latino children under the age of 5, 34% are living under poverty. And so oftentimes the research with DLLs and Latino children in particular identifies risks and challenges that are not due to language, but are due to poverty. So I think we need to do a better job of disentangling what is a language issue, what is an issue related to additional risk factors like poverty. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind.
Okay, thank you so much for a wonderful discussion. And the folks in my class who read the Hart and Risley study, see, it's important. But mainly I wanted to touch on technology. Joan, you kind of mentioned it and went over it quickly. And as I'm sure you all know, but not everyone here might know this, the American Academy of Pediatrics said no screen time for kids under 2, and yet, of course, everyone's making a lot of money on these apps and things for young kids. So just a few comments on that.
I'm really concerned about it. I think that we need much more research on it. The Academy said no television for children under 2. I think they're still talking about, what's the difference between television and screens, because there is a difference, and so there's more debate going on about that. If you look at the percentage of children that have screens in their bedrooms that are under, under 2, it's pretty big concern. And so we need a national dialogue about this. I think parents need guidance about this. I think they don't. That's why the Academy message was so important, because at least it was clear. What is, how do you distinguish between Skyping with your grandchild on Sunday morning and prolonged exposure, to screens? How do you get over the fact that we've got a digital divide economically? And what does that mean? So we've got a lot of discussion and debate, but personally, I'd like to see kids go outside more and interact with nature more and interact with their parents more. Every place I go, people want to talk about apps for parenting, apps for children. And I think it's fine if it brings parents together with their children, but not separates them. And that's what I see happening.
I agree completely.
I mean, we could spend the whole day talking about, and you have wonderful people here in Boston that have been at the forefront of raising the concern about this issue, but I also think we have to be realistic about the lives that families are leading now and find a balance.
And I think certainly with older children and adolescents and adults, there's a lot of good research showing specific effects of specific aspects of technology use. So for example, cell phones and computers at night before going to bed. So cell phones and computers, even more than TV, tend to be used at very close proximity to your face. And so the light from them has a much more disruptive effect on sleeping patterns. That research has, to my knowledge, all been done with adolescents and adults. So I think that there are a lot of questions we really don't know about young children and media and technology, and effects on social skills and neurological functioning and play and time and reading.
I don't think we should shy away from telling parents that they have to be careful and they have to be cautious and they have to limit the amount of screen time. We have to call that out and say it and not be embarrassed to say it. I think so many people are conflicted about this because we're all on our, it's been an hour and a half since I looked at my BlackBerry. And so we're all conflicted about it, but we have to be cautious about this with children, I think.
Well, I'll say something just, the project that I presented that had the family literacy component, last year I was approached by a colleague who wanted to develop the family piece, but digitally, to develop a digital family literacy program so that parents could have access to books just with a thumb drive. We could just carry it, give it to parents in the program and give them access to books. And when he first approached me with the idea, I thought it was interesting, but I have my reservations, and in part was because of this notion of children using technology independently and by themselves, and young children. But I was convinced by looking at some research that is showing that it's about the interaction between the parents and the child or the children and the device. So if you can plan for an activity where the parent is involved and the interaction is still centered on the parent and the child and not just the device. And so I'm considering the digital literacy program, but I still think it needs to be presented in a way that is developmentally appropriate and it doesn't become about the technology.
Well, it's not black or white. It's balancing this, and that's why it's so hard to take a hard and fast.
Yeah. And we don't have
position.
enough research.
No.
When I was trying to make these decisions, there's not enough evidence to support the use of technology in this way. So I think we need more studies examining this. Yeah. Yeah, in the back.
I'm actually a doctoral student in higher education, so the other end of the spectrum. But this question stems more from my role as a parent to a 2-year-old. And I'm thinking back to Dr. Coley's presentation with the chart showing the reading gains in different types of school settings, unlicensed home care, licensed home care. and noticing that I think it was furthest to the left, being at home had no reading gains. So I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that, because that startled me. I stayed home with my son for the first year. BC very kindly let me defer my acceptance. And so I'm fortunate not to fall into the income bracket that I believe your research was on. But I was just wondering if you guys could talk a little bit about how income level affects parents at home, or maybe this is beyond the scope of this discussion,
Right.
about early child care centers.
There are many ways to answer that. First, I will say on just a basic sort of methodological manner, that was mostly due to just the way we presented the graph. So the comparison group was for children in parent care. That does not mean that children in parent care didn't have any gains. We were just showing the gains of children in early childhood education in comparison to the gains of children in parent care. So that's one thing. Secondly, I think you raise a really interesting point about the sort of intersection between home environments and early education environments. I think, generally speaking, the newest research suggests that early education programs promote gains most strongly among children who come from disadvantaged home environments. So from poor families, from families with parents with low education, from families which provide more limited cognitively stimulating activities and interactions with their children. So those are the children who benefit most from early childhood education programs. Children who have very rich home environments benefit less. Are we ending on that?
Well, I think everyone's getting hungry and thirsty, and we've had a very, very rich presentations here. And I'd really like to thank Joan Lombardi for coming back to Boston College after 40 years, and for Kyle DeMeo for giving me the idea, and for Rebecca and Mariella for giving their rich comments today. So thank you all for being here.